Do you enjoy fishing? I don't. I went once when I was like 4 or 5 with a friend. It takes forever and the smell of fish clings to your hands. So when I first heard about Tsuritama during its original airing, I wasn't too sure if it was really for me. I gave it a few years, then came back to it, and it's safe to say I don't think your opinion on fishing will drastically change your enjoyment with this one. Tsuritama originally came out in the spring of 2012, with A1 Pictures behind the production, Kenji Nakamura on directing, with Toshiya Ono and Toko Mishida writing it. One of the most striking things about this show is the art style. There isn't that much else like it, and even though it borrows many elements from a lot of styles, such as long limbs and hair with volume to spare, it manages to create something unique through its balance of smooth and sharp edges on the world and characters, the character designs themselves, with a variety in some of the facial structures. The background and the environments have a basic appeal to them, and the colour palette expresses a range of bright and vibrant choices. The only bad thing is the CG boats, and the other vehicles that strike a bit of an ugly contrast to everything else. It's pretty consistent, never having any noticeable dips in animation quality, or being able to show a charming world, a feature that would be sorely lacking if it was done with any other style. Along with nice angles and a few helpful visual metaphors, I honestly think that without such a style, Tsuritama would lose a lot of its appeal. Even though, like previously said, it shares a lot with other generic art styles, I feel as if these were done to create something unique and fitting as opposed to copying the trend. If the characters had larger and more boring eyes or generic haircuts, if we didn't see any adults at all, I'd feel differently. But that isn't the case, and it lends towards its more charming appeal. I think that from the beginning, it's easy to get attached to the characters and world. Yuki's introduction is one that's familiar, with his departure from his old life and into the new, as he states early on that he and his grandmother move frequently, meaning that he hasn't made any meaningful connections with anyone else aside from her. Shortly after arriving in the seaside town of Enoshima and his new school, Yuki's introduced to Haru, a self-proclaimed alien who never leaves him alone. As frustration increases, Haru reveals that he wants Yuki to help him by fishing and somehow saving the world. Too scared to face the consequences if he refuses, Yuki reluctantly accepts. Yet he has no prior experience with fishing and needs help. From then on out he tries to achieve this loose objective, while trying to find his place, as a current of events no one could have guessed emerged. One of the things that's pretty much apparent in every aspect of Tsuritama is its quirky and off-the-wall nature, which is clear throughout the plot. Fishing is something I've never seen take the spotlight in anime or most media, yet here it doesn't act as just an odd feature. It plays a similar role as music does in something like Kids on the Slope, where the details of the activity aren't the main focus, yet it's how it brings people together. However, there is detail given as to the fishing techniques and the basics. Authenticity was obviously a must, as they even had a fishing director on the team. Personally, I really enjoy these kinds of stories where people find something to attach themselves to, as the process of striving for a meaning or goal is entertaining, while the friendship they all share is charming, and another aspect to strive for. It's a testament as to how engaging this show can make its task seem, as fishing is even more of a subdued and unpopular topic as opposed to music or sport, yet I found it just as engaging due to the struggle of it all and the worthwhile rewards. Like previously said, Yuki has no experience. He has to work hard to get anywhere, and this pace follows the first few episodes, with the pacing and general intrigue being another good aspect. For a show that's so seemingly bizarre, with a few slice-of-life elements, I feel that it never has a dull moment. It's quite formulaic for the most part, with the kind of 3-act structure you would assume attached to an overarching plot with subplots running underneath. Yet while I was watching it, this never stood out to me. This may be due to how the pacing varies. While the first few episodes introduce you to everything, it slows down towards the middle, fleshing everything out. Yet no matter the episode or content within it, developments large or small, are made across its 12-episode runtime, with the intrigue of this place and what will happen next pulling you along, as it can be quite unpredictable. After watching Tsuritama, it feels as if everything neatly and subtly fell into place from the planning and design perspective. Whether you want to watch it to relax or become engaged in the world and characters, I think both options are available. Admittedly, I don't think it's flawless. Yuki's constant travelling is never explained, and one scene in episode 6 is somewhat cliched, and everyone can see it coming from a mile away. I was kind of pulled out of the moment, but that was mainly due to the high quality of everything leading up to it. Finally, tone is something I think this show grasps completely. Its optimistic and cheery nature is inviting, and is something that continues for a lot of it. Yeah, I wouldn't describe it as overly optimistic and that everything is great 100% of the time, but rather that the potential is there. As the show continues and more problems occur, more serious issues arise and drama along with it. I think these aspects are all handled greatly, with reasonable foreshadowing beforehand, believable motivations from the characters involved, and a gradual increase in the stake of the situation. Yet the tone never gets too dark and rides the fine line of being able to show less than stellar situations without feeling as if it's coming off track, and can bounce back to Glee without feeling jarring. It can also deliver really heartfelt moments, along with comedy which is sweet, amusing, and adds to the overall charm, ranging from the ridiculousness of the situation to puns.
Nah, I'ma stay home!
The world and story really shine through, as Tsuritama manages to be enjoyable and engaging, showing the age-old tale of friendship, while still being fun to watch, which is probably due to the great writing, which also falls into the characters as well. Yuki represents the audience in many ways, being the one to question all of the strange things occurring to him, and trying to belong in a place he's unfamiliar with. He's your typical reluctant, shy protagonist. One of my favourite types if done right. Like many of the other characters, he starts out as a stereotype, yet becomes more developed as time continues. One of the things I loved about him was how genuine he felt as a character, an example being his small quirk of figuring things out, or his grounded and relatable backstory. And this can be said for most of the cast. They never have dialogue which feels odd, out of place, or robotic. It makes sense to their character and makes them feel more human and unique. Even the character relationships are great. Expectedly so, characters don't just talk to everyone in the same tone dictated by their stereotype. They vary depending on who they are and what the other person means to them. This shouldn't be a big point, but it's surprising how many shows can ignore this. Definitely one of the best aspects of the characters is their development. Everyone has their time to shine and grow as a person, whether it's gaining confidence or figuring out more about the people around you. Yet it progresses throughout the whole story, starting from around episode 2 till the end. It isn't a simple one and done. They have many different flaws, from understanding to intent, and they even out while still making mistakes in other areas. I hate it in most stories where the characters never have negative attributes attached to them, as for me it just feels superficial and immediately takes me out of it. So to see these aspects, it made the cast feel even more human and relatable. With the variety in personalities and unique issues, you'll probably pick a favourite. Development even extends to the side characters, even if it is quite simplistic. I'm still glad they were given attention. In most instances you expect the sides to stay unchanged, as it's quite a task developing everyone while still keeping engagement up, but Tsuritama does this as well. The only real character I had a problem with was the grandmother, who pretty much had the same expression throughout and never really changed much, always being the voice of reason. I honestly think the characters are perhaps the best aspect of Tsuritama. Each of the mains feels human and has to go through changes. They're relatable, lovable, and fun to watch. I would only say to avoid this if you prefer less stereotypical characters, but apart from that, I think they're all great and wouldn't change a thing. From the alien and a 25-year-old secret agent attending high school that has a duck which is also a secret agent, the characters are quite grounded and plausible in the context of the place, even though the story and every other aspect seem odd and quirky, such as the soundtrack, done by the Kurikoda Quartet. This has to be one of the most charming and gleeful OSTs I've heard in a while. With instruments ranging from ukuleles to recorders, harmonicas to trumpets, it all fits together perfectly, creating a clearer vision of this world, and from what I've personally heard, is pretty unique. I couldn't name another anime which I think sounds similar. It's all appropriate and its implementation is great, always reinforcing what's happening on screen, while never detracting. During certain moments where it could have clearly been used, it isn't, letting the action sink into the viewer even more. There's a good variety of tracks, hitting different emotions, but they all feel similar enough to the point where it keeps a good consistency. Much like the animation, the soundtrack greatly lends towards the overall feel of Tsuritama, and it would have been lacking if it had any other style. This is also one of the only cases in which I've watched a show in its entirety in both dub and sub. Having in mind that I don't speak the language, the sub's pretty clear and appropriate in the tones the characters use, and they all fit the part. After hearing the dub, I was slightly skeptical at first, after hearing Adam Gibbs as Yuki, having a slightly more angsty and moody delivery, but after a while I appreciated it, and all the casting fits. They all get used to their roles pretty quickly. The delivery and the acting's good, and I don't really have anything to complain about. It's pretty clear that I really enjoyed Tsuritama. It's one of those pieces of media where I feel that everything came together perfectly. It may be lacking in some aspects, but everything feels so appropriate, and it all works well with one another to the point where I couldn't imagine it being as satisfying or enjoyable if any of these aspects would change drastically. I could recommend this to anybody wanting a good slice of life character piece, or if you want your mood to be picked up.